The men who left her on the mountain did the arithmetic out loud first. 1 horse, 3 riders, a storm coming down off the high passes like a second nightfall, and a woman they had decided was already dead. So they cut her loose at the tree line, turned the animals back toward the valley, and told themselves the cold would be quick about it. Marguerite Doyle was 26 years old, and the last thing she heard from another living soul before the white closed over her was a man's voice saying she wasn't worth the feed. She did not lie down. That was the first thing, the thing that mattered, though no one was there to see it. She put one boot in front of the other along a trap line she could not see, following nothing but the lean of the wind, because lying down was what the wind wanted, and she had spent her whole life refusing what wanted her dead. A mile above her, in a cabin chinked with moss and clay, a man named Elias Crane heard his dog stop eating. That was all. The dog, a rangy gray brute named Ash, more wolf than knot in the shoulders, lifted his head from the bowl, ears pricked toward the door, and went still in the way that meant something living was out in the weather, where nothing living should be. Elias had trapped this slope for 11 winters alone. He knew the difference between the dog's hunger and the dog's listening. He set down his own bowl, and he reached for the long gun by the door, because on a mountain in a blizzard, a knock was never good news. Elias Crane was 34 and built like the country had built him, broad through the back, slow to move, with a beard gone early to iron gray and a scar that ran from the corner of his left eye down into the collar of his shirt, a pale seam in weathered skin that he never explained, and no one living had the standing to ask about. He had a face that quieted a room at the trading post, and a way of taking up a whole doorway so the light could not get past him. People in the valley called him the ghost of the Crane claim, and a few of them, the unkind ones, called him worse, and he had let every name they handed him stand, because a name was a fence, and a fence kept people on their own side of it. He opened the door into a wall of wind. For a moment there was nothing but snow moving sideways, and the cold reaching into the warm room like a hand. Then Ash was past his leg and gone into the white, and Elias swore once, low, and went after the dog, because the dog did not run from warmth for nothing. He found her 40 yards down the slope, on her knees in a drift, one hand still fisted in Ash's ruff, where the dog had pushed up under her arm to hold her off the ground. She was not crying. He registered that before he registered anything else, that her face, blue-lipped and rimed wide at the lashes, was set in an expression that was not fear and was not pleading, but something harder, something that looked the storm in the teeth and dared it. Her coat was a town coat, thin, wrong for the high country. Her lips were moving. He bent close to hear it over the wind, expecting a prayer, expecting his own name, expecting the small begging sounds the dying make. "I'm not," she said. "I'm not. I'm not." Not what, he never learned, not that night. He got an arm under her knees and one behind her back, and he lifted her against his chest. She had stopped being a stranger somewhere in those 40 yards, and become instead his to answer for. And he carried her up through the snow with the dog breaking trail ahead, and he did not say a single word the whole way, because there was nothing to say that was worth the breath it would cost in that cold. Inside, he laid her by the fire and did the things that had to be done, in the order they had to be done. He did not think about who she was. He thought about her hands, which were the color of tallow and would not close, and her feet, which he freed from sodden boots and wrapped against his own ribs under his shirt, because that was the warmest thing in the room, and a stranger's modesty was worth less than a stranger's toes. He melted snow and warmed it and got it past her lips a spoon at a time. He banked the fire higher than he had burned it in years, and watched the heat push the cold back out of her face inch by inch, hour by hour. The long way, the only way, until somewhere past the middle of the night, the blue went out of her mouth and a little color came up under her skin like a cold taking. She slept for a day and a half. I want to stop here for just a moment on this picture of a man feeding warmth back into someone the world had thrown out to die, because it is the whole reason this channel exists. If you have ever watched people decide a person was worth nothing and quietly, fiercely wanted to see that person live long enough to make them wrong, then you already belong here. Take a second and subscribe, because the slow, stubborn, unbought kind of love story I tell here is the only kind I am interested in. And there is a great deal more of this one still to come. He did not sleep. He sat across the fire with the long gun across his knees and Ash's head on his foot, and he watched a stranger breathe in the only place in the world he had ever managed to be left alone, and he turned over in his mind the same hard fact again and again, worrying at it like a tongue at a broken tooth. Someone had put her out to die. The country did not do this to people. The cold was honest. It killed everyone the same and meant nothing by it. But to walk a living woman up a mountain and cut her loose at the tree line and ride away, that was a thing men did, on purpose, with their hands, and a man who had done it once would come back to be sure it was finished. He took down from the mantel a small carved bird, a chickadee no bigger than his thumb, worn smooth and dark at the wings from handling, and he held it as another man might have held a rosary, and he watched the door. When Marguerite Doyle woke, the first thing she did was lie perfectly still and take an accounting, because waking up alive was not a thing she had planned for, and she had learned long ago that the wrong move in the wrong room could cost more than the cold ever would. There was a fire. There was the smell of wood smoke and tallow and wet dog, and under it the green smell of the moss in the walls. There was a roof of split logs close overhead, and there was a man the size of a door sitting against the far wall with a gun across his knees and his eyes on her, eyes the flat gray of river ice, and a scar down his face like a fault line in the earth. She did not scream. She had been past screaming for years. "Where am I?" she said. Her voice came out a rasp she didn't recognize. "My cabin." He didn't move. "Crane Claim, North Slope above the Doyle Valley." Doyle. The name landed on her like a hand. He watched it land and read it, and something in the flat gray eyes sharpened a quarter inch, and she understood that he had heard the name before, and that it meant something to him, and she did the thing she always did when a stranger learned too much too fast. She gave him nothing back. She closed her face the way he had closed his. "How long?" she said. "Day and a half. My boots. Drying. You'd have lost your feet in them. You near did anyway." She looked down then and saw that her feet were bound in clean strips of wool, and she felt the deep ache in them that meant the cold had been in and been driven out. And she understood all at once and without being told exactly what the warming of a frozen body cost a man in firewood and sleep and watching, and a part of her recoiled from it instantly because a debt was a leash, and she had spent her whole life slipping leashes. People did not do things for nothing. She had learned that lesson in rooms she would not name. Every kindness was the first half of a price. "I can't pay you," she said. It came out flat, hard, a fact laid on the table between them like a knife. She watched his face for the thing she expected, the slow look, the calculation, the particular ugliness men's faces took on when a woman with no money told them she had no money. She'd seen it 100 times. She braced for it like you brace for a blow you have already felt once. It didn't come. Elias Crane looked at her for a long moment, and then he looked at the fire, and then he said, in a voice like two stones grinding, "I didn't ask you to." He got up. He was even bigger standing. He crossed to the hearth and ladled something from a pot into a wooden bowl, broth gone thick with the morning's meat, and he set it on the floor beside her within reach of her ruined hands, and not an inch closer, so that she would not have to suffer him handing it to her so that she could take it or leave it as a free thing. And then he went back to his wall and sat down and picked up the small carved bird and turned it over in his fingers and said nothing else at all. She looked at the broth for a long time. Then she ate because she was not a fool, and because some stubborn animal part of her had decided back at the tree line that she was going to live out of pure spite, and a body cannot spite the world on an empty stomach. The broth was hot and good, and it hurt going down. She watched him over the rim of the bowl. He did not watch her eat. He had given her that too, the small mercy of not being watched, and she filed it away with a suspicion that bordered on dread, because she could not make it fit any pattern she knew. Men who fed you wanted something. Men who looked away while you ate it wanted something worse, or wanted nothing. And she did not have a drawer to put a man who wanted nothing. The storm did not let up for 9 days. 9 days is a long time to spend in one room with a stranger you do not trust, and they spent it the way two wary animals share a den, by carving the small space into territories and learning each other's edges without ever once admitting that was what they were doing. She kept to the fire. He kept to his work, which in a snowbound cabin was the endless husbandry of survival, mending traps, oiling iron, splitting the inside woodpile down and stacking it back, rendering fat, scraping a hide stretched on the wall, all of it done with the unhurried economy of a man who had done every one of these things 10,000 times alone and had stopped long ago, needing anyone to see that he could. He did not ask her who had left her on the mountain. She noticed that. She noticed it like you notice a held breath in a quiet room. Any other man would have asked the first hour, would have demanded the story as the price of the broth, would have wanted the drama of it, the names, the wrong done, so that he could stand inside it as her rescuer. Elias Crane asked her nothing. He moved through every hour as though her past were a country with a fence around it, and he had no business on the far side of the fence, and slowly, against every instinct she owned, that not asking did what 1,000 gentle questions never could have. It made a small room inside her where the truth could sit without being demanded of it. On the 3rd day, she told him her name, just the front of it. "Rennie," she said out of nowhere into the sound of his knife on the hide. "People call me Rennie." "Rennie," he said, trying the shape of it, and went back to the hide. On the 4th day, she watched him favor his right hand, and she saw that 2 fingers on it did not bend right. Old breaks set crooked, and without meaning to, she said, "Who set those for you?" And he said, "I did." And there was a whole life in those 2 words, a whole long account of a man who had had no one to set his bones. And she heard it, and she did not pry the lid off it, and he glanced at her once, surprised as though she had passed a test he had not known he was given. That was how it went, day after snowbound day. Care through the small machinery of the hours. He learned that she could not sleep with her back to the door, and he moved her pallet without a word, so the door was always in her sight. She learned that he flinched, barely, the first time she reached past him for the salt, a flinch he hated himself for. And after that she announced her hands before she moved them near him. Reaching by you, quiet every time, until the flinch went away. He learned that she hoarded food when she thought he wasn't looking, a crust palmed into a pocket against a hunger that wasn't coming anymore. And he said nothing about it, only started leaving a little more out than they would eat, so that the hoarding cost her no shame. She could not sit idle 9 days. So she took up the things her hands could do while they healed. She mended where he trapped. She learned the long, even pull of the scraping knife on the hide, and he watched her find the rhythm of it and said, once, "You've worked." And she said, "I've worked." And neither of them said it what, and it was enough. Two people who had both been taught by hard teachers that closeness was where the danger lived, learning joint by joint, hour by hour, that this once it might not be. The chickadee sat on the mantel through all of it. She asked about it on the 6th day. "You carved that." "My mother carved it." It was the most he had volunteered about himself in 6 days. She carved them all winter, every winter. Said a body needs to make one beautiful, useless thing a year, or the country takes the soft part of you and you don't get it back. And did it, Rennie said. Her voice had gone careful. "Keep the soft part." He turned the bird over in his crooked fingers. "Some of it," he said. "Enough." And he set it back on the mantel, square in its worn place, and did not say that the carving had been his mother's, and that his mother was 11 years dead, and that he had not made one beautiful, useless thing since, because some accounts you do not read aloud, not even to the one person finally close enough to hear them. On the 7th day, the cold got into the cabin in the deep, small hours. The fire burned low, and Rennie woke shivering on her pallet to find the room gone gray-blue and bitter. She heard him get up. She heard him feed the fire back to life, quiet, trying not to wake her. And then she felt the weight of his own coat settle over her, heavy and smelling of him, of wood smoke and cold iron and the clean animal warmth of him. And she lay very still under it with her eyes shut and her heart going hard. And she did not say thank you, because thank you was a coin, and this was not a transaction. And he went back to his side of the fire, and she heard him sit down, without his coat in the cold he had given to her. And she lay awake the rest of the night under the weight of a kindness she had no defense against, and felt the last of something inside her, some old, hard, frozen thing, begin against her will to give. On the 8th night, the wind cracked a length of clay loose from over the door, and they sealed it together in the screaming dark, his hands and hers passing the wet moss back and forth. And when it was done, they stood together in the dim, both breathing hard, snow melting in their hair, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him. And for one long beat, neither of them moved away. And the 4 inches between his arm and hers was the loudest silence she had ever stood inside. And then ash whined from the fire and broke it, and they stepped apart, and neither of them said one word about it, and both of them lay awake a long time afterward, thinking about the 4 inches. On the 9th day, the wind died, and the silence after it was so total that they both woke at once, in the dark, to the absence of the thing that had filled the world for over a week. They lay in the dark and listened to the nothing. And Rennie, who had spent 9 days telling herself she did not trust this man, found that the loudest thing in the silence was how badly she did not want the storm to be over, because the end of the storm was the end of the only safe room she had ever stood in, and she did not yet have a word for what that meant. And she was afraid of the word, and she did not sleep again that night. In the morning, the world was white and blinding and brutally, gorgeously clear, and the mountain looked like the first morning of creation. And Elias Crane stood in his open door, looking down the long, bright slope toward the valley, and he said, without turning around, the longest thing he had said to her yet. 3 men rode you up here, he said. It was not a question. I cut the sign on the fourth day, before the new snow buried it. 3 horses, one carrying double on the way up, all of them light coming down. He turned then and looked at her, and the flat gray eyes were not flat anymore. They'll come back, to be sure. Men who do a thing like that always come back, to be sure. A pause. Who are they? And Marguerite Doyle, standing in the one safe room in the world on the morning it stopped being safe, looked at the man who had not asked her for 9 days and decided to open the fence. If you've made it this far into Rennie's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. My husband's brothers, she said. The fire popped. Ash lifted his head. Garrett Doyle is dead, she said. 3 months now. He owned the valley below you, the cattle, the bottomland, the water rights, all of it. He married me out of a mining town 2 years back, when nobody else would have me, and I knew exactly what I was to him. I was a way for a hard man to look softer to his neighbors. I made my peace with it, and then he went through the ice on the spring crossing, and he died, and his will left every acre and every head and every drop of that water. Her voice did not shake. She would not let it shake. To his wife, to me, and his brothers, Royce and Sutton, and the youngest one, Cole, decided that a woman from a silver camp did not get to own the Doyle Valley. She lifted her chin. So they took me up the mountain to where the coal could undecide it for them, where there'd be no marks, just a town girl who wandered off in a storm and was never found. The way they're already telling it, I'd bet. They never laid a hand on me. They didn't have to. They just opened the gate and let the winter in. The room was very quiet. They called me nothing, she said, the whole way up. Royce did the talking. He said the valley had been Doyle land for 40 years and it wasn't going to pass to... She stopped and made herself say it, because saying it was a way of surviving it. Some bought and paid for nothing that crawled up out of a silver camp. That's what I was worth to them, exactly the price of the feed for the horse that carried me up the mountain. Elias Crane stood in the doorway with the bright morning at his back and listened to all of it without moving. And when she was done, he was quiet for so long that she thought, here it is. Here is where he weighs it. Here is where he decides a dead man's water rights are worth more than a live woman's life, and shows me the bottom of him like all the rest. Instead, he closed the door against the cold. He crossed the room. He took the long gun down from where it leaned and he checked it. Not with any drama, just with the plain competence of a man taking the measure of a chore that has to be done. And he said, then they'll come up here. And when they come, they'll find you're not on the mountain anymore. He set the gun by the door, ready. You're in a house, with a door, and the door's got somebody behind it now. It was the most that anyone had ever offered Marguerite Doyle, and it was offered the way he offered everything, sideways, in the language of logistics, a door and a gun, and a man to stand behind both, and she understood it for exactly what it was. And she had to turn and face the fire so that he would not see what it did to her, because she had not cried at the tree line, and she had not cried when she woke, and she was not going to start now over a kindness, except that she did, silently, 2 tracks down a face that had forgotten how, while the chickadee watched from the mantle and the dog watched the door, and the man behind her had the grace again to pretend he did not see. They did not come that week. The snow lay too deep in the passes, and Elias knew it, and he used the time the way he used everything, with economy and forethought. He taught her the cabin, where the second cache of powder was, behind the loose stone in the chimney, where the snowshoes hung. how the bar dropped across the door, and how to drop it fast. He did not say, "In case I'm not here." He did not have to. He was teaching her to survive him, the way his mother had taught him to survive the country, and they both knew it, and neither of them named it. And in the teaching, something thawed that the fire never could have reached. She learned the country from his door. He showed her the slope, the tree line where they'd cut her loose, the dark seam of the creek under its lid of ice, the place across the gorge where in summer the bear came down for berries. He had names for all of it, private names, the names a man gives a world he has lived in alone for 11 years and never once expected to say out loud to another person. The widow pine, the sermon rock, the place he called with the closest thing to humor she had seen in him, the bank, because a martin he'd been after for 3 years had a dean there, and he had never once made a withdrawal. She laughed at that, actually laughed, a startled, cracked sound she had not made in longer than she could remember. And he looked at her with an expression she could not read, and she realized, with a lurch under her ribs, that he was looking at her like a man looks at the first warm day after a winter he wasn't sure he'd live through, and she did not know what to do with that. So she did nothing, and the not doing anything sat warm and terrifying in her chest for the rest of the day. They fell into the shape of a life without deciding to. She woke before him and built the fire up. He came back from the line at dusk and found it burning, and her at the scraping, and something in his face eased every single time, as though he had spent the whole cold day half expecting to come home and find her gone, or find her a thing he'd dreamed. They ate across the fire from each other and did not need to fill the quiet. He started telling her things, small things, the day's things, where the martin had doubled back on him, how the creek was sounding under the ice, whether the high sky meant more snow. She started answering with more than one word. The silences between them stopped being walls and started being a room they both lived in, comfortable, warm, shared. And one evening she caught herself humming something under her breath while she worked, a thing she had not done since she was a girl. And she stopped, startled, and looked up and found him watching her with the bird, half-carved, forgotten in his hands. And neither of them looked away as fast as they should have. One night, weeks in now, the wind worrying at the chinking, she asked him the question she had been carrying since the first morning. "Why didn't you ask?" she said. "Who left me? You waited 9 days. Any other man would have made me tell him the first hour, just to feel like the hero of it." Elias was a long time answering. He was working a strip of leather soft in his hands, and he kept working it, and the firelight moved on the scar. "When I was a younger man," he said finally, "I told a story about myself to anybody who'd stand still for it. How I came to be up here. How I came to look like this." He touched the scar without seeming to know he did it. "And every time I told it, I was telling it to make somebody think a certain thing about me. I was selling it. And one winter I realized I'd told it so many times, I didn't know anymore which parts were true and which parts I'd shaped to get the look I wanted on somebody's face." He set the leather down. A person's story isn't a coin to spend on what other people think of them. It's the only thing that's all the way theirs. I wasn't going to make you spend yours on me. You'd spent enough already. The fire cracked. Outside, an owl asked its one question of the dark. "What happened?" Rennie said softly. "To your face, to you. You don't have to sell it to me, but I'd like to be told it. By you. As a true thing." And Elias Crane, who had not told the true version to a living soul in 11 years, told her. He told her about his mother, who had carved the birds, who had come up the mountain young with a hard husband of her own, and had made a life of it out of grit and the occasional beautiful, useless thing. He told her about the winter the fever came through, the one that took his mother in 4 days, and how he had been a young man of 19 and had dug the grave himself in ground so frozen it took him 2 days, and how the digging had nearly killed him, and he had half wished it would. He told her about the years after, alone, when he had let the soft part of himself go hard on purpose, because the soft part was where the grief lived, and a man could not afford to keep a room heated for grief and survive a mountain too. And he told her, last in the fewest words of all, about the scar, about the cougar in the bad winter, the one he'd fought off the doorstep of the goat shed with a fro in his bare hands, and how it had been the most alive he'd felt in years, to nearly die, and how ashamed that had made him, that it took a thing trying to kill him to make him feel anything at all. I decided after that, he said, that I would live and die up here alone. I swore it. Felt like the only honest thing left. A man who can only feel alive when he's nearly dead has got no business inflicting himself on another person. He looked at her across the fire, and the flat gray eyes were wide open now, all the fences down. I held that for 11 years, Rennie. 11 years I was certain of it. And then my dog quit eating, and I opened a door, and there you were, on your knees in the snow, telling the whole storm you weren't going to die. His voice went rough. And I have not been certain of one single thing since. The space between them on the cabin floor was about 4 feet. Rennie looked at it. She had spent her whole life measuring the distance between herself and other people, keeping it wide, because distance was safety and closeness was where they got their hands on you. 4 feet. She looked at the man on the other side of it, the size of a door, gentle as snowfall, telling her the truest thing he owned because she had asked him to, and for no other reason, expecting nothing back, his hand with its crooked fingers open and empty on his knee. She crossed the 4 feet. She did not say anything, because she had no words equal to it, and neither did he. And words had never been the language they spoke. She crossed the floor and she sat down beside him, her shoulder against his arm, and she felt him go still. That whole-body stillness she had learned meant something living was near him that he had not let near in years. And she stayed there, leaning into him until the stillness eased and his arm came around her, careful, like a man handling something that might break or might bolt. And they sat that way in the firelight for a long time, and did not say one word, and it was the closest either of them had been to another human being in longer than either of them could stand to count. It changed nothing on the surface, and it changed everything underneath. The days went on the same. The fire, the line, the scraping, the quiet. But the quiet had a new floor under it now, and they moved around each other in the small cabin, like two people who had stopped pretending the 4 inches were an accident. He would come in cold, and she would have his hands in hers, chafing the blood back into the crooked fingers before he could say a word about it. The same care he had shown her returned at last in kind. She would wake in the night from the old dream, the tree line, the wind, and find him already awake across the room, his eyes on her in the dark, steady, keeping watch the way he kept watch over everything he had decided was his to keep. And she would breathe out and sleep again. Neither of them said the word for it. They did not need the word. They had a language older than the word, made of wood smoke and broth and a coat laid over a sleeping body in the cold, and they spoke it fluently to each other all that long high country winter. The next morning he found the letters. He hadn't been looking for it. He was after the second powder cache for the spring, the one behind the loose chimney stone, and when he worked the stone free a packet came with it. oilcloth gone stiff with the years, wedged in behind where his mother must have put it the last autumn she was alive. He knew her hand the second he unfolded it. He sat down on the hearth with it, slow, and Rennie watched the blood go out of his face, and she did not ask, because she had learned from him how not to ask. He read it twice. Then he read it to her, because that was the new thing between them now, that the things that were all the way his he would choose now, to make partly hers. It was not long. His mother had written it, knowing the fever might take her. She had felt it coming, she said, the way she always felt the weather coming, and she had hidden it where she knew he would not find it until he had reason to pull the cabin apart, which she figured would be the day he finally needed the spring powder for something that mattered more than Martin. She had known him even then. She wrote that she was not afraid of dying, but that she was afraid for him, afraid of exactly the thing that had come to pass, that he would take her death and use it as a reason to wall himself off from the living, that he would mistake being alone for being safe, and being hard for being strong. And she wrote one line that Elias's grinding voice broke on, the only time Rennie ever saw it break clean through. "You are not the scar the world put on you," his mother had written. "You are the hand that carved the bird. Do not let the mountain talk you out of the one for the sake of the other. Make one beautiful, useless thing a year, my boy, and give it to someone, and you will not go hard, no matter what they do to you. The world is cold enough on its own. Don't you help it." He folded the letter back along its old creases. He sat for a while, and then he got up, and he took down from the mantel his knife and a clean billet of pine he'd been saving for a tool handle, and he sat back down by the fire, and for the first time in 11 years, Elias Crane began to carve a bird. It took him 3 evenings, his crooked fingers fumbling a craft they had abandoned half a lifetime ago, and Rennie watched him find it again a little at a time, the knife learning the grain, the shape rising up out of the wood slow and patient, just as the color had risen under her own skin that first night by the fire. He gave it to her on the 3rd evening, a chickadee, like his mother's, rough where hers was smooth because his hands had forgotten the trick of it, but unmistakably alive, head cocked, wings just lifting. He set it in Rennie's palm without ceremony, the way he did everything, and he said, "Beautiful, useless thing." And that was all. And Marguerite Doyle, who had owned almost nothing in her life that someone had not later demanded back at a price, closed her ruined fingers around the first thing she'd ever been given free, and understood that she was, against all sense, against every leash she had ever slipped, in love with the man the valley called the ghost of the Crane claim. The Doyle brothers came up the mountain the day the high pass opened. There were 3 of them, the way she'd said, Royce in the lead, big and well-fed and certain on a good horse, with the easy authority of a man who has never once been told no by the world and does not expect to start now. Sutton behind him, narrow and watchful, a rifle across his saddle. And the youngest, Cole, hanging back, barely grown into a man's body without growing into a man's stomach for things, who could not keep his eyes off the snow, and who had, Rennie would understand later, been the one who argued against the tree line, and been overruled and had hated himself every day since. Ash gave the warning a full 10 minutes before they came in sight, and Elias had time. He put Rennie behind the loose chimney stone with the 2nd rifle and the powder and a clear line on the door, and he told her, flat, "You don't show yourself, whatever you hear. They think you're dead. Dead's the only card you're holding. Don't spend it till it wins the hand." And then he went out and stood in front of his own door with the long gun cradled easy, and waited for them to ride up, the way he'd waited 11 years for nothing at all, "That's far enough," he said when they were 40 feet out. Royce reined in and looked the big man over and wasn't impressed, because Royce had never in his life met the thing that should have impressed him. "We're looking for a woman," he said. "Wandered off in the storm a couple weeks back. Family's worried sick." The lie was smooth as butter. "You see anybody up here, friend?" "No," Elias said. "That a fact?" "It's the only fact you're getting off this mountain," Elias said. "There's nobody up here but me. There's been nobody up here but me for 11 years. Now you've come a long way to ask one question, and you've got your answer, and the pass'll close again by dark. I'd start down." Sutton's hand moved on the rifle, just an inch. Elias saw it and did not appear to. "Funny thing," Royce said, and swung down off his horse, boots crunching, taking his time, letting the size of the three of them fill up the clearing the way he was used to filling up rooms. "We cut sign down at the tree line. The old sign, mostly snowed over. But a man knows what he's looking at. Looked to us like somebody got carried up this way." He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "And here's the only house for 10 miles. And here's you. Awful quick to tell us to leave." He took a step. "Why don't we just have a look inside your cabin, friend, and put the family's mind at ease?" "Because it's my door," Elias said, "and you weren't invited through it." And the easy thing went out of the clearing all at once. What happened next happened fast, the way these things do after they have been slow for a long time. Sutton brought the rifle up. Elias was already moving. He was a big man, but he had spent 11 years being faster than a marten and a cougar and a winter, and he put his first shot through the meat of Sutton's shoulder and spun him out of the saddle before the man's barrel cleared the horse's neck. Royce clawed for the pistol at his belt. Elias swung the long gun toward him, and in the half-second it took him to swing, Cole, the youngest, the one who hadn't wanted any of it, sat frozen on his horse and did nothing, which was the most useful thing he could have done. But Royce was fast too, faster than a heavy man had any right to be, and his pistol came up and barked, and Elias Crane took the ball high in the left side and staggered, and the long gun's second shot went wide into the snow. And Royce grinned through the powder smoke and steadied his pistol on the big man's chest for the killing shot. And there was nothing between Elias Crane and the end of his 11 lonely years but 6 feet of cold mountain air. That was when the cabin door opened. Not the chimney stone. The door. Marguerite Doyle stepped out of the doorway with the second rifle already at her shoulder, dead feet steady, and she did not say a word. There was no time for words, and she had never wasted them anyway. And Royce Doyle turned at the sound of his own death coming, and got out exactly half of it. "You," he said, the whole of his contempt and the whole of his disbelief packed into that one word. "You're nothing." And Rennie Doyle, who had been weighed and found worthless and put out on the mountain to die, shot her dead husband's brother off his feet before he could finish telling her what she was worth. The clearing rang and went silent. Sutton was down in the snow, holding his shoulder and going nowhere. Royce was down and not moving. Cole sat his horse with his empty hands held high and his face the color of the snow, watching the woman his brothers had carried up the mountain to bury stand over the body of the man who had given the orders, smoking rifle in her ruined hands, and learning, 11 years too early, or maybe right on time, what the world cost when you let the winner in on purpose. Rennie did not look at him. She had already dropped the rifle and was across the clearing and on her knees in the snow beside Elias Crane, both hands pressed to the dark, spreading high on his left side. Her voice gone ragged and fierce. "No," she was saying. "No, you don't. You don't get to do this. You swore you'd live up here. You swore it, so you live. Do you hear me? You live." And Elias, gray-faced, looked up at the woman, holding his blood inside his body with her bare, ruined hands, and the corner of his mouth moved, and he said, in a thread of the grinding voice, "Bossy." And she laughed, a terrible cracked sob of a laugh, and pressed harder and didn't let him go. She did not let him go for 3 days. She got him inside, she and Cole both, because Cole climbed down off his horse and helped her without being asked, and without a word. His first small payment on a ledger, he would be settling the rest of his life. She packed the wound with the moss off the walls and the herbs Elias had named for her on better days, never once thinking she'd need them. She set Sutton's shoulder roughly and bound it, because she was not going to let even that man die on her floor. And then she sent Cole down the mountain with his 2 brothers, one slung over a saddle and one cursing through his teeth. And she said to the youngest the only thing she said to any of them, "Tell it however you want down there. But tell it true to yourself at least. You know what you came up here to do." And Cole, white and shaking, said, "Yes, ma'am," and took his dead and his wounded down the mountain, and the valley would have its story by nightfall. And for once the story would be the true one, because a frightened young man had looked his own worst self in the face in a snowy clearing, and decided finally that he could not carry it. And then it was just the 2 of them again, and the dog, and the fire, and a man who would not stop bleeding, and a woman who would not stop pressing. The fever came on the 2nd night, the same fever that had come for his mother. And Elias talked out of his head some, and the things he said when he was out of his head were her name, mostly, Rennie, and once, clear as a struck bell, "Make one beautiful, useless thing a year," his mother's line. And Rennie sat over him through both long nights and fed the fire, and cooled his face and held his crooked hand in both of hers, and made him by main force and spite, and something she finally had the word for, stay. On the 3rd morning the fever broke. The gray came back into his eyes, the clear river ice gray, and he opened them and found her face hanging over his, hollow-eyed and fierce and unspeakably tender. And he said, "You're still here," like it was the most impossible of all the impossible things. And she said, "Where would I go?" and meant it as the whole vow it was. He mended slow. A man does not take a pistol ball through the side and get up the next week. And he hated lying still the way he hated few things in the world, and Rennie learned a whole new dialect of him in those weeks. The language of a proud, capable man brought low and made to be tended. She did not coddle him. She had no gift for it, and he would have hated it. She did for him exactly what he had done for her that first night. The same plain logistics turned the other direction. She kept the fire. She changed the moss packing and did not look away from the wound the way he hadn't looked away from her ruined feet. She propped him up to eat and set the bowl within reach and not an inch closer, so he could take it as a free thing. And when the pain was bad in the deep, small hours, she did the one thing she had never in her life done for another soul. She sat close in the dark and let him take her hand and hold it. And she held his back, and neither of them called it anything, and both of them knew it was everything. It was in those slow weeks that the thing between them stopped being a question. There was no single moment she could have named, no scene with words in it. It was the accumulation, 100 small acts of keeping each other alive, returned and returned again, until one gray afternoon she looked up from the fire and found him watching her with an expression that had stopped hiding anything at all. And she did not look away, and he reached out with his crooked right hand and tucked a strand of hair back from her face. The gentlest thing those hard hands had ever done, and she turned her cheek into his palm and closed her eyes And that was the whole of it. That was the proposal and the answer. Both, a man's scarred hand and a woman's face, turned into it by a fire on a mountain. And nothing either of them could ever have said would have made it more true. Cole came back up the mountain twice that spring. The first time, white-faced, to say that Royce was buried and Sutton was mending, and that the valley was telling the true story now, his story, because he had stood up at the church and told it himself, with his hat in his hands and his voice shaking. He did not ask Rennie to forgive him. He was too honest for that, and she respected him for it. He only said, "I should have got off my horse at the tree line. I'll be sorry the rest of my life that I didn't." And Rennie, who knew the exact weight of that particular regret, said, "Then carry it. But carry it forward." And Cole nodded and took the words like a man taking on a load he meant to bear, and rode back down. The second time he came up, he brought a side of beef and a sack of seed, and he fixed the sagging gate on the goat shed without being asked. And Elias, watching from the porch where Rennie had made him sit and rest, said quietly, "That one might come out all right." And Rennie said, "People do. Sometimes, when somebody lets them." And Elias looked at her a long moment, and did not say that he was speaking of two people on a porch as much as of a young man with a hammer. The valley belonged to her. That was the part that worked itself out slowly, over the spring, in the unhurried way that true things settle. With Royce dead, and Sutton ruined, and Cole turned honest, there was no one left to contest the will. And the circuit judge who rode through in May took one look at the widow Doyle, steady-eyed and plain-spoken, holding the deed her husband had signed in his own hand, and made it law in 10 minutes. The cattle were hers. The bottom land was hers. The water was hers. Marguerite Doyle, who had been worth the price of a horse's feet, owned the richest valley on that side of the mountains. She gave half of it to Cole. She did it for reasons Elias never fully understood, and never pressed her on, the way he had learned not to press. Maybe because the youngest had helped her carry the man she loved in out of the snow. Maybe because she knew what it was to be the least and the overruled, and she would not become, on the day she finally had power, the very thing that had nearly killed her. "A person can be made into a wolf," she told Elias once, watching the valley green up below them, "or they can be given one chance to be something else." Royce never gave Cole the second thing. I can afford to. And Elias, who had been handed that second chance himself by a dog that quit eating and a door he chose to open, did not argue. Word of the mountain came down to the valley slow and then all at once, like meltwater off a high snowfield, and the valley did with it what valleys do. The hard men who had ridden with Royce stopped meeting Rennie's eye in the trading post, which suited her. But the others came. Hannah Bell, who had buried 2 husbands of her own to the high country and run her late husband's mercantile alone for 9 years, walked up the slope one June morning with a sack of flour on her shoulder and a wheel of cheese under her arm, and she set them on the porch and looked the widow Doyle up and down and said only, "You're the one shot Royce." When Rennie said yes, Hannah Bell nodded once, as if a thing she had long suspected about the world had finally been confirmed, and said, "Good. He needed it. You eaten today?" And that was the beginning of a friendship that would outlast both of them. Old Pruitt, who had trapped the next mountain over for 30 winters and was the only man Elias had ever called a peer, started coming by with his pipe and his opinions and a habit of fixing whatever was broken on the place before anyone could tell him not to. The widow, Esther Vance, brought seed potatoes in a way of talking to Rennie woman, to woman that Rennie had never once had in her life and did not know she had been starving for. They did not come because they pitied her. They came because she had done a hard thing in a hard country and lived, and that, on a mountain, is the only letter of introduction that has ever mattered. They came with a tool and a question and a casserole, and they came back the next week whether she had been warm to them or not. And slowly, without anyone deciding it, the woman who had been carried up the mountain to die alone became the center of a circle of people who had each survived their own winters and recognized one of their own. They were married by the same circuit judge in the fall, in the clearing in front of the cabin, with Ash for a witness and Hannah Bell and old Pruitt and Esther Vance, and a quiet, hat-in-hand Cole standing in the trampled snow to see it, and the whole green valley below them and the high white peaks above. Rennie wore her boots, the same ones, the ones that had near cost her her feet, because she was not a woman who threw away the things that had carried her through. When the judge asked Elias Crane if he took this woman, the man who had sworn for 11 years to live and die alone on this mountain, looked at her for a long moment in front of every person who had ever called him the ghost. And he did not give a careful answer, and he did not give a sideways one. "I do," he said, plain and clear and loud enough for the valley to hear. And Rennie heard the 11 years go out of him on those 2 words, and she did not bother trying to hold her own face still, and Hannah Bell wept openly and unashamed, and Ash, who understood ceremony not at all, lay down in the snow and went to sleep. The cabin on the north slope got a second room that summer, built by a man who worked slow and a woman who worked beside him, and the south end of the valley got a young rancher named Cole Doyle, who tipped his hat to his brother's widow every time he passed and mended. And the trading post in the valley slowly stopped calling the man on the mountain the ghost, because a man who comes down twice a season with his wife on his arm and a quiet word for everyone is just a neighbor, and the unkind names a town hands a lonely man have never once survived the sight of him being loved. On the mantel of the cabin there are 2 carved birds now. One is old and dark and worn smooth, a chickadee carved by a woman 11 winters in her grave, who knew her son before he knew himself and left him the only instruction that ever set him free. The other is rougher, newer, a chickadee with its head cocked and its wings just lifting, carved by a hard man's hand that had forgotten the trick and remembered it for the only person who ever made him want to. They sit side by side in the worn place, the mothers and the wives, the past and the kept soft present, and on winter nights when the wind comes down off the high passes like a second nightfall, Marguerite Crane takes the rougher one down from the mantel and turns it over in her ruined, healed hands, and the man the size of a door watches her do it from across a fire. He no longer burns to keep the grief out, but to keep something better in. The world will do the arithmetic on you. It will weigh what you are worth in feed and water and silence. It will reckon what your absence might save, and it will write a number beside your name and act on it. And sometimes it will be cold enough to carry you up a mountain and let the winter finish what its conscience could not. But the world's arithmetic is not the only ledger, and it is not the one that settles last. The last ledger is the one a dying woman left in a chimney for a son she loved, the one that says you are not the scar the world put on you. You are the hand that carved the bird. And a person who learns to read that ledger, even late, even half frozen, even at the tree line with the wind telling them to lie down, has a worth the cold cannot touch and the cruel can never price. So, here is what I will leave you with, and I would truly like to know what you think. Elias Crane swore for 11 years that the safest thing a hurt person can do is wall the whole world out and live alone. And a freezing stranger at his door proved him wrong at the risk of both their lives. So, tell me, honestly, do you believe the people who have been hurt the worst are right to build the wall and keep everyone on the far side of it? Or do you believe, like his mother did, that the wall is the real danger, and the only thing that ever truly saves us is being brave enough to open the door? Tell me which one you have lived down in the comments, because I read every single one of them, and I'll see you on the mountain.